All right, well, I think we've got most of the people registered. I can see have logged in here, so I'm sure some others might be joining us, but we'll go ahead and get started. That way we can make sure we make the best use of our time tonight and hopefully give Chris plenty of time to share what he has to share this evening. Before I kind of turn it over to him and introduce him, I just want to spend a few brief moments here talking a little bit about our ministry here at GracePoint, just to familiarize you all with kind of some of the things that we offer. And then I want to talk just briefly about the webinar, kind of what our schedule is or our plan is, and a little bit about how the webinar functions work so that you guys can interact with us online tonight. So my name is Brian Hannon. I'm the one that's been sending you guys all kinds of emails that you're probably getting tired of receiving by now. But I'm the director here at GracePoint Resource Center. We're located in Rensselaer, Indiana. I'm also one of the pastors at Tri-County Bible Church here in Rensselaer. And GracePoint is a ministry of our church that we started about 4 years ago, and we offer biblical counseling. We offer biblical classes on various topics, such as parenting, marriage, anxiety, obviously social media, and other just various resources and classes that we can help people to approach these topics from a biblical perspective. So our goal for tonight is to hopefully give you guys some very practical help and instruction in a topic that is very difficult to navigate through. Those of you that are parents or grandparents, you know how hard it is just to do those things, and adding social media on top of that here in the last several years has just made things more difficult. So we're hoping that tonight will be something you guys will find practical and encouraging, that you can all walk away from here with some specific things that can really begin to help you guys right away. As far as logistics go, if you haven't probably figured it out already, this is a webinar. You guys will have access to your video, or you won't be able to communicate with us through your microphones. So the only way you can communicate to us, there's two primary ways. One is the chat function. Whether you're on a smartphone or on a computer, you should be able to see the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any issues, audio-wise or video-wise, or any complications, just send it to me through the chat function. Just type in a question or comment saying, hey, I don't have audio, or it's not loud enough, whatever the issue might be, and I'll try to help you through that. The other function is called the Q&A function, and that is where you can actually submit questions. Even as Chris is talking, if he makes a statement about something, and maybe he moves on from that, but you want to ask a follow-up question, just feel free to type those in while he's speaking. During the whole session, you can type in questions. And then at the end, we're hoping to leave about 30 minutes or so, maybe a little more than that, hopefully, where we can interact through some Q&A time. And that will be a very valuable time for you all. So don't hesitate to send in questions during the talk. Another thing I want to mention is if we do happen to get cut off, which I don't expect that we will, but technology is not always perfect. So if there happens to be a glitch in the webinar or internet, or something happens and we all get disconnected, just go back to the link. I'll just restart the meeting and we'll just pick it up from there. So I don't foresee that happening, but if it does, it's better to have a plan than to not have a plan. So that should be pretty simple if that happens. So before I kind of introduce Chris, those are the main things I wanted to say about our ministry and about the webinar itself. Before I now introduce Chris, I want to just take a minute and pray for us. Pray that this evening would be helpful and encouraging to you all, and pray for Chris as well, as he'll be sharing with us tonight. So let's open in a word of prayer. So Lord, we come to you tonight and we thank you for Chris, first and foremost. We thank you for the ways that you have been training him over his years, Lord, and how you have formed him into an expert in this area. I'm so thankful, Lord, for his wisdom and his understanding. I'm thankful for his willingness to share with us tonight. And I just pray that you'd give him wisdom and understanding and clarity as he teaches. And I pray that you would help us to be good listeners whose hearts are open and receptive to what we learn. Lord, this is a hard topic to navigate through, and we all want to please you in this area of our lives, and we want to help you or help our children to be pleasing to you in this area of their lives as well. So I pray that this evening would be insightful and fruitful and helpful to all of those in attendance. We just ask that you would be with us and that you would be glorified and honored by all that takes place here tonight. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. So I just want to take a brief second here to introduce Chris and share with you all a little bit about him. So Chris lives in Nashville, Tennessee, with his wife and his two children. He's going to share a little bit more about them here in a minute. But he is currently serving as the Director of Creative and Special Projects at Moody Publishers. He's a social media marketing and communications consultant. He has published 2 books on social media, and I'm going to just kind of give a brief overview of those books. The first one is called Terms of Service, and this was published in 2022. And the subtitle here is The Real Cost of Social Media. So I've read both of these books. I found them both very helpful. This book primarily deals with our personal relationship with social media. He goes into great detail about a lot of the ways that social media is affecting us in a negative way, and not just us individually, but really our world and our culture as a whole, and how it's collectively being affected by social media. And then he spends the rest of the book kind of going through some practical suggestions based on these problems and these issues. Here's some specific things that you can do to address those issues in your personal life. So the next webinar that we're going to be doing in 2 weeks is going to cover more of the material from this book. And then the second book is called The Wolf in Their Pockets. And the subtitle is 13 Ways the Social Internet Threatens the People That You Lead. So this will be the material that he's going to cover tonight. So I'm not going to go into much detail on it, but I will say that I found it very helpful, very insightful. 13 specific chapters that cover 13 ways that the internet is affecting our children, your grandchildren, maybe people that you are serving, leading in church ministry or whatever it might be. The social internet is radically changing our culture and our world, and so that's what Chris is really going to share with us tonight, is some of the key ideas from that particular book. But I would encourage those of you who want a little more thorough coverage of this topic to purchase those 2 books, because they are very helpful, and I think you will find them helpful as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Chris, and I've asked him if he could kind of start by just telling us a little bit about himself, his family background, and then also a little bit about his current role with Moody Publishers, and a little bit of his background in youth ministry and some of the church ministries that he's been involved with. So Chris, could you kind of walk us through those things, and then we'll kind of get into the other part that you had to share tonight.
Of course, yeah. I will just briefly give you a little bit about me, and then we can hop into the kind of bulk of the material. So yeah, my name is Chris Martin. I live here just outside Nashville, Tennessee, in a little suburb. I think of it as a suburb called Murfreesboro. A lot of folks who are local don't think of it as a suburb, and I kind of joke, you just got to get on I-24 at 7 o'clock in the morning, headed to Nashville, and you'll know it's a suburb pretty quickly. I used to make that drive, so it definitely feels that way. But we're home to Middle Tennessee State University, this little town that I'm in. And so it's a college town. Frankly, feels a good bit like Lafayette. So
Okay.
about that, I grew up in Fort Wayne. So I love getting together with I get to speak to a lot of churches. I was just in Kansas City a couple weeks ago, and have done some speaking all around the country on this topic. But it's always special to me when I get together with my fellow Hoosiers, but really more the Boilermakers than the
Boilermakers,
yeah. So I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, as did my wife. And so if you know Fort Wayne, I went to Snyder High School. She went to Northside High School. And so we both grew up there. We also both went to Taylor University there in Upland, home to the famous Ivanhoe's ice cream shop and burger joint. The best Christian college in Grant County, alongside Indiana Wesleyan University, which is also right there in Marion.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we both went to Taylor University, graduated from there in 2013. My wife and I got married about 2 weeks after graduation. And then came down here to Nashville, and I got a job working at Lifeway Christian Resources, which is a large Christian publishing house, and at that time also Christian retailer. And so
Hmm.
I worked in a handful of different roles at Lifeway over the years, many of them dealing with online content like blogs or podcasts or social media. Eventually, I became the head of social media at Lifeway. So I was running the main Lifeway social media handles and overseeing about 60 social media managers who were running about 270 social media accounts. And so we had a lot going on, and it was a
Wow.
very busy time in the life of our organization. And so that was a lot, and I did that for a few years. And then in 2020, we welcomed our daughter Magnolia at the beginning of the pandemic, April 6th, 2020. Maggie was born. And shortly after that, I decided to leave Lifeway because I was kind of sick of the social media stuff. I'm going to be honest. That's a theme you'll hear maybe a little bit, but I was kind of sick of being on the front lines of social media and said I would like to do something maybe in Christian publishing, which was never my plan. Like I got a Bible degree from Taylor, I got a Master's of Divinity from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, but I never planned to go into publishing. That was just never in my. I was
Hmm.
like, well, I'll probably be a pastor. If I'm getting a ministry degree, probably be a pastor.
Right.
But anyway, so I decided I'd still like to do. I like publishing Christian books. I love reading Christian books, and I love helping get them out into the world. And so, in 2020, fall of 2020, I joined the team at Moody Publishers. Which, if you've ever heard of Moody Radio, surely you guys are close enough to Chicago. You know some of their ministry. They're all around the
Hmm.
country and world, but obviously based in Chicago with Moody Bible Institute, the school, Moody Publishers, and Moody Radio is kind of the three-headed monster of Moody up there in Chicagoland. And so
Hmm.
I joined them in 2020 to help do some sort of skunk worksy. They said, "Hey, we want to do some non-traditional Christian publishing projects that aren't just our typical 200-page paperback books. We'd like to do some new stuff." And I was like, "Hey, I kind of forged a lot of new paths when I was at Lifeway, and so I had a lot of experience with creating content online. And so what we ended up doing in those first couple of years is we created a resource called BibleToLife.com, which
Hmm.
was taking bits and pieces of our books and saying, hey, someone may never read this really helpful book on why the church is important. But man, these sections of these chapters are really helpful for people who might be Googling things like, what does it mean to be a church member? Or why should I be baptized? Or things like that. So how
Hmm.
about we take those bits and pieces of those chapters and put them on the internet as articles for anyone who might be doing a lot of Googling and searching around? I'm really passionate about um, the search engine, Google, being
Hmm.
one of the biggest mission fields at our fingertips.
Hmm.
There's so much competition for truth in the biggest website in the world, which is Google and the Google search engine. And so I think it's really important for us to do what we can to promote the truth of God's word and the gospel in that space. And so I spent the first few years of my time at Moody really stewarding the BibleToLife.com project. I'm still stewarding that, but just a few months ago, I was asked to, in addition to leading that project, lead the creative team. So, being the creative director at Moody Publishers means a few things. Primarily, it means that I oversee getting all of our books with nice covers. So everyone says don't judge a book by its cover. We're counting on the fact that probably people are going to do that, and so we
Yeah.
like to have nice looking covers on our book. I'm grateful. Actually, my cover of Wolf just this past year won an award for having an amazing cover, which is yeah, I'm not being prideful because I didn't do the cover,
Right.
but it's just a great example of covers matter, and having beautiful covers is a good stewardship of our resources. And so I get to lead a team of amazing artists and graphic designers who do many of our covers, as well as lead some creative writers on our team who, if you ever picked up a book and looked at the back of it, there's all kinds of descriptive,
Hmm.
like, here's what the book's about. And so everyone on my team helps write all of that as well. And so
Okay.
I get to lead that team, and it's a blast. In addition to all that, I promise I'll wrap up my bio here in a second.
No,
In
that's
addition to all
good.
that, I've led in student ministry at every church we've been a part of since I was in high school. When I was in high school, I was helping out with the middle school ministry. And then once I got to Taylor, I was serving in my local church high school ministry there, leading a high school small group. And then once we moved down to Nashville, the two churches we've been at in Nashville, my wife and I both served in the student ministry the whole time. In
Okay.
fact, there were a few years from about 2017 through 2020, I was actually on staff at our current church as the youth minister, not as like a paid full-time staff member, because our youth ministry is a bit small. It's about 30 kids K through 12, so it's not huge.
Hmm.
But I was on staff, attended all staff meetings, and was kind of the point man for our youth ministry from 27 to 2020. We had our second daughter just about 4.5 months ago. Daisy, she was born in September. And so when we found out we were pregnant with her, I said, hey, I think I got to step back from this youth ministry stuff. I can't leave my wife twice a week for bedtime, with
Mhm.
two little ones. So I think that was probably the wise decision. But it's kind of weird. This is the first, I'll reference it in a minute when we start getting into the material, but this is the first school year that I've not been a part of a youth ministry since
Hmm.
I was in elementary school, because I was in middle school, then I was in high school, and then I've been serving in student ministry ever since then. And so it's
Wow.
been a bit of adjustment. I miss it a ton. I just love middle schoolers are fine, but everyone knows, middle schoolers can be kind of hard.
Yeah.
I know I was hard when I was a middle schooler. But I love working with high schoolers especially. And I really love, I know how hard of a time it was when I was 17 and 18 trying to figure out what to do with my life. And that's such a huge inflection point. And
Mhm.
I know how much impact so many guys had on me at that age that's just always been kind of one of my favorite age groups to work with. And so
Uh,
I've loved the last few years working with our juniors and seniors and helping them kind of think about that transition out of mom and dad's house. And so anyway, I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so that's just a little bit about me. Fort Wayne native. In fact, I was telling Brian before we got started. My dad is from Lafayette, so I remember, and my grandmother still lives there. She's my only living grandparent. She lives in
really?
Lafayette, right off 9th Street.
Okay.
Um, and my dad went to Purdue in the 70s and 80s, was a computer science major back when computers took up whole rooms. And so many times going to Lafayette when I was a kid from Fort Wayne. It's not a long drive, but it's also not an easy drive. You're taking a bunch of state highways and all that. I
Right.
remember seeing signs for Rensselaer and all that, and so it's just really cool to be with you guys. And I feel a little bit like I'm going home, even though we're only doing this virtually.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's great. I hope you all are blessed by this, and I hope it's helpful. And I'm looking forward to answering any questions you all might have. Brian, should I get into the material?
Yeah, I would just remind everyone, like I said before, if you have things that he hits on that maybe you'd like him to develop a little further, just feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function there. And yeah, I think it's a good time just to turn it over to you, Chris. I'll just mute myself, but if I have any follow-up questions, to anything you say, I might chime in, but yeah, I'm ready for you to rock and roll here. Looks like you're muted now.
Sorry, I was coughing, so I muted myself. Yes, I have a little bit of a cough, such as having a toddler in the wintertime. Frankly, I'm grateful this is the worst I've had so far this year. So I'm counting my blessings that all I have is a little bit of a cough. So I apologize if I cough. I may try to mute myself so I don't cough in all of your ears. Um, so yeah, you all can see my screen. Brian, can you see my screen? We're good. Okay. um, so tonight we're talking about how social media is discipling your students and what to do about it. I'm going to, just so a little bit more logistics and context, I'm going to blaze through a lot of this. I'm going to talk fast as if I haven't been already. So buckle in, strap your seatbelts, and because I want to leave plenty of time. Brian and I have talked about this. I want to leave good amount of time for discussion, Q&A, because I've found in talking to so many parents and people who care for young people about this topic that there are often a lot of questions, and those questions can be helpful. Even though you might be asking a very personal, specific question, your question might actually really be helpful for someone else to hear. So I want to make sure we get to plenty of time to discuss and have a little bit of back and forth. I don't want to just talk at you for the next hour. So I'm going to try to fly through some of this, and if anything is unclear, like you said, submit questions, and we'll have a good time for discussion. So a few years ago, I was in the early stages of writing my second book on social media. In fact, we talked about terms of service. It's second birthday today. Terms of service came out 2 years ago today, and then but a few years ago, actually, right around when it came out, I was in the finishing stages of writing the second book, The Wolf in Their Pockets, which published about a year ago. But because one of the primary audiences for that was pastors and parents, I have never been a full time pastor. I've been on staff, but being a full time pastor is a different gig. And because I had never been a parent of a kid with social media, I was a new parent of a young child and now two, but I've never been a parent of a child with social media. I was wanting to engage pastors and parents throughout the whole writing process of that book because I recognize my blind spots, but I want to make sure I recognize all of them. And so it's always good to have some feedback as you're writing a book as an author. And so as I was engaging pastors and parents throughout the writing of The Wolf in Their Pockets, um, I would ask them a handful of questions as I was writing just to help get some information, some anecdotal stories, things like that. And the primary question I asked them at first was how, this was for more the pastors and the parents, how have you seen social media positively or negatively impact people in your church? And so I want to share just one of those stories with you now. A pastor told me about an interaction he had with a woman in his church. The woman had posted on one of her social media accounts that she was having a rough week. She explained in some detail what was going on, but it was kind of ambiguous. And the pastor told me that someone from the church, I think it was like their women's ministry leader, recognized it as maybe a possible call for help and suggested that the church reach out to the woman, like at a staff meeting, like, hey, did you see this from, I'm making up a name, did you see this from Joanne? Maybe we should reach out to her. What do you guys think? And and the church leader said, yeah, for sure, reach out. And so when she reached out to offer help, the woman responded in kind of a shocking way. She was offended that a church leader had reached out to her and tried to help, seemingly embarrassed that they saw what she had posted on social media. She was kind of taken aback and offended. You can imagine this was a bit perplexing to the church staff. They weren't calling her out for doing something bad. They weren't, chastising her or anything. They said, hey, we saw you seem to have, you're struggling. Is there anything we can help with? And she was upset. She said, the woman said to the church leaders, I posted asking for for encouragement from my online community, from my social media community, not my offline community. The woman also said, my online life is private. And she said that it should not be a concern to anyone at the church. Again, this woman shared about what was going on her very public social media account, not like in a message to one person or anything like that. She wasn't being called out for some kind of sin the leaders were seeing. They were just trying to help. But to be clear, this woman was not a student in the student ministry. She was a grown woman. But I think this story is indicative, frankly, of how many Christians, regardless of age, view their relationship with social media. It's separate from real life, and no business of anyone in church leadership. Like I said a minute ago, at the end of the school year, I stopped serving in student ministry for the first time since I was a high schooler myself. I spent 15 years from college through now serving in youth ministries at every church I've been a part of. And as you can imagine, there's been a lot of intersection over the years between my work in student ministry and my interest in social media and how it affects us. But today, I just want to give you 3 overarching ways that I see social media changing the students in our lives. Drawing both of my experience as a student ministry leader and as a social media researcher, author, expert, I guess. I don't like thinking myself that way, but yeah. I'll do my best to give some concrete examples for each of these, but you might have to fill in, because social media is such a unique personal experience, you might have to fill in some of the blanks on your own as well. So let me be clear about something too up front, a little bit of a disclaimer. None of what I'm about to say is unique to students and student ministry. Since I began writing about social media pretty regularly 6-ish years ago on a newsletter and on the internet in various places, I've always been quick to make the point that boomers in big church are being discipled by Facebook as much as the teens in the youth room are being discipled by TikTok. And I think it's really important. It's just really important to me as someone who loves young people and kind of sees myself as an advocate for young people. It's really important to me that we make this not a young person issue. I think so often social media has been like, oh, those teens and their phones. But it's like, come on, like if you go to Olive Garden on a Friday night, you're going to see a mom of a teenager on a phone as much as you're going to see the teenager on the phone. We all know this. So what I want to be clear about up front is we're going to be talking about students, teens, and how social media is impacting them tonight. That's the focus of our discussion. But I want us all to agree, even though I can't see your faces and see you nodding, I want us all to agree that we're not going to pick on teens about this issue. Like, this is teenagers, they're special in their relationship with social media because they are the trendsetters, they are the power users. It's likely that if a teen has social media, they probably do use it more than their parents do. But frankly, I've met a lot of teenagers that are a little bit more savvy on social media than even their parents are because they're more native to it. And so I think it's just important for us, even as we're going to look at how social media can really distort teens and their lives a little bit tonight, that you not hear me picking on them, and that you don't see them as lesser or like they have a less healthy relationship with social media. Because I think, frankly, a lot of adults, we could have a more healthy relationship with social media. So just a little bit of that, and like I said, we'll leave a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if any questions come up, submit them, keep them, however you want to do that, and we'll have some time there at the end. So first, the first general way I see social media discipling students is this: social media changes how your students think. Multiple studies done in the last few years tell us that the average American adult who spends any time on the internet spends 2.5 hours per day on social media. That is the average American adult. So it's fair to say that most teens would meet or exceed that average if they have social media at all. Because if it's surveying American adults, only 18-year-olds are really going to be the high schoolers that may be in that survey. So that parent that I was just talking about is on average spending 2.5 hours a day, 2.5 hours a day on social media. So teenagers are likely spending more, though less research is done about teenagers just because it's hard, legal issues, polling teenagers, all of that. So it is my very strong opinion that we can never overemphasize the ways that our relationship with social media rewires our brains. I think this goes far beyond the stuff that teens watch or hear or post. This is about far more than content. It goes deeper down to the platforms and technologies themselves. And that's something you'll hear me harp on a little bit. Could even come up in the Q&A time, depending on if anyone asks a question. Something I want to stop and say is there's so much focus around teenagers and the kinds of content they consume. Like watch this, don't watch that. Listen to this, don't listen to that. Those are all fair concerns. Like we should be concerned about teenagers engaging with pornography or other such explicit material that we don't want them engaging with. However, I think that issue gets like the lion's share or like 90% of the attention. And too many of us aren't considering like, how is the Instagram algorithm shaping my teenager? Like the technology, like the ones and zeros, and how is that shaping a teenager by delivering them more deeply into their desires rather than delivering them from their desires? Like those things are a bit more subtle. Like it's like, yes, porn bad. Like that's an easy black and white thing. But I think a lot of us underestimate how the technologies themselves shape young people. The triplet cornerstone values of social media are entertainment, attention, and identity. These values are related, of course. Attention is the primary currency of the social internet. We post in hopes of accruing enough attention to buoy our sense of self. In a way, only recognizing the image of God in us really can. We pay attention to content that we find entertaining. So if the acquisition of attention is kind of how one becomes wealthy, if attention's the currency and you're like, I want to get as much attention as possible. How do I do that? By being as entertaining as possible. This starts to change the way our teens think about themselves and about the kinds of content they create. You in a much like smaller version of this that's not new, it's the same formula as the class clown, if you will. Like the class clown is the class clown because the class clown wants attention. It's not like maybe he does have a future as a stand-up comedian, but the reason someone is a class clown is because they want attention. Like they're entertaining, they're goofy, they act out, they like rip on the teacher, whatever form it takes, because they want attention. They want to be entertaining so that they can get attention, because when they get attention, they feel better about themselves. This starts to what social media has done is it's made it a whole lot easier to want to be a class clown, but not in a humorous way, but in a way that makes us buy into the idea that more attention equals more value in terms of the self. This is how it's changing the way our students think. When our students spend an average of 2.5 hours per day with social media, their values are going to begin to reflect the values of social media. Just think about what you do for 2.5 hours a day. You sleep, hopefully, for more than 2.5 hours a day. If you work, you're probably working for more than 2.5 hours a day. Unless you watch a 3-hour Christopher Nolan movie, you're probably not doing anything else for 3 hours, for 2.5 hours. If you're a bodybuilder, maybe you're working out for 2.5 hours or running a marathon or something. But like 2.5 hours a day, there's nothing you do for that amount of time. But the average American adult spends 2.5 hours a day on social media. Maybe you accrue 2.5 hours a day with your kids, over the course of the day or something. But if you do something like scroll social media for 2.5 hours every day, it's going to shape your values. It's going to shape, if you're a good Christian, if you're an active member of your church, you spend 2.5 hours a week or every 2 weeks at your church. Like that's how much you spend per week. This is per day. So naturally, this is going to shape the values of our teens and our values, but the values of our teens especially. So what are the practical effects of this? One, students who place a high value on entertainment are going to want to be more entertaining because that's how they get attention. This is kind of what I just talked about with the class clown analogy. Secondly, this is what makes social media so unique and so different from that sort of class clown analogy why this is a supercharged version, is attention is easily quantified and commodified through social media. We see attention quantified in follower numbers, video views, likes, and plenty of other metrics. The implication, of course, is the person that gets more likes, follows, views is more valuable, more popular, more important than those who don't get as much engagement. We'll get into more of that in a second, but I think you can't understate the impact of how today, when I was in high school from 2005 to 2009, I couldn't quantify how popular I wasn't. I was not popular. Surprise, surprise. But like I couldn't put a number to that. I couldn't say, oh, because I only have X amount of followers or because no one ever likes my Instagram posts, therefore I'm not popular. I had no data to back that up. Well, today, teens have all kinds of data left, right, and center to back up the fact that they are or aren't popular, and that's going to impact them mentally, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there. So the general rule of social media is that those who are most entertaining are going to get the most attention. So it follows that as a student's values start to warp to the values of social media, they're going to want to be more entertaining to get more attention and therefore feel more valuable. And third, the final cornerstone of social media is identity. So it goes entertainment, attention, identity. And I'm sure you can see how the other two values feed into this one. I kind of already alluded to it. Teens are very sensitive about their identities. This is where social media's impact on teens is more pronounced than it is even on adults. Though I think many adults struggle with who am I and all of that. That's not a concern that goes away when you become an adult, much to the chagrin of those of us who have maybe more recently become adults. Like that question of who am I, what am I supposed to do, that doesn't go away. But like I kind of mentioned, my love for 17 and 18-year-olds, you can make a case that age when you're becoming an adult, at the end of your teenage years, you struggle with who I am and who am I and what am I meant to do more than perhaps any other time. That's when a lot of us are beginning to hit the climax of that, if you will. And so I think it's important to see how entertainment and attention can lead into that third value of identity, because striving for attention by being entertaining shapes our understanding of how valuable we are and who we are as teens. I'm speaking as a teen, but people in general as well. So those are just a few ways. I think that's the best way I can explain. That's how it changes how our students think, what they value, what they care about. The fruit of spending 2.5 hours a day on average, if we can use the adult average for teens, that's going to impact how they think. Those are just a few ways. Second, social media changes how your students feel. Social media has aged. Social media is older now. We have a lot more data and interesting anecdotes and things that we can begin to learn about its long-term effects on people. And it's historically been pretty difficult to demonstrate any causal relationship between one's use of social media and one's mental health. So I'm not a mental health expert, don't have a counseling degree, don't have a psychology degree, but I read a lot of people who do. And historically, it's really hard, just if you don't know how this works, I won't go too deep into this. It's really hard, like in the scientific community, there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of hoops to jump through to be able to say X causes Y, like this action causes this mental health issue. You can't just say that. You have to have a lot of proof. And the burden of proof is very high for saying X causes Y in any area of scientific study, but especially in mental health. And so for the longest time, because frankly, social media hasn't been old enough and we haven't been able to do the studies needed to make such a declaration, no psychologist or mental health expert has been able to say increased social media use causes mental health issues in teenagers. We've been able to easily show how increased social media use is correlated or related to mental health issues in teenagers. Plenty of circumstantial evidence, if you will. But it's been hard to show clear forensic evidence that social media use, an increase in social media use leads to an increase in mental health issues. That is now becoming possible by the grace of God. There are a lot of brilliant social media researchers, mental health researchers, social psychologists around the country, around the world, who are now kind of staking their reputation. Basically, they're saying, I've seen enough. There have been enough studies that have been done to show that social media use among teenagers causes mental health issues. So all that's to say, we're finally getting there, and we can all praise God for that, because that is going to be a key component of any action that can be taken on a national or global level to kind of reel some of this in. Jonathan Haidt, I want to give you a name. Jonathan Haidt, that last name is Haidt. He's one of the biggest researchers in this area. He's a social psychologist at NYU, New York University. He's not a Christian, but he's very sympathetic to Christians and works alongside a lot of Christians on this issue. He has a Google Doc, kind of like an open source Google document that researchers around the country are just contributing research to. I think it's up to almost 250 or 300 pages, basically collating as this like groupthink open source project of like, let's start building the case that social media use leads to mental health issues. And he's just one of the biggest leaders in that. He's written a number of articles and books that have this topic in it. The Coddling of the American Mind is one of those. And I'll dive a little bit more into his data, perhaps, if we have time. If not, we can get to it in the question and answer period. All this to say is it's fair to say that our interactions on social media change how we feel about other people. And this is true with our teenagers. So anything, if you hear me saying us, it's true for teens. Engaging with people on the internet often makes us feel antagonistic toward people we don't know. And this is perhaps most pronounced among teenagers. Socialization mediated by the internet is so disconnected from important aspects of our personhood, like body language or vocal tone, that it's far too easy to see the people with whom we engage online as less than human. We've all either been treated poorly on the internet or have treated other people poorly on the internet, or we've at least witnessed people be mean to each other. This is a very common experience. And our relationship with social media can feel like we're never successful or pretty or interesting enough. And this is especially pronounced among teenagers. Something that I think is most interesting here, sad, but worth noting, is this illustration that I read in a book one time. The book is called Hit Makers. And it's a book, fascinating book. And it's a book, frankly, about like why things are popular. So it's a book about why certain music is popular, why, basically it's like, how do things go viral? That's kind of, but not just on the internet, like generally, like how did the Beatles go viral? How did all of these different cultural phenomenons really blow up? And there's a chapter in there about social media a bit. This was written in probably 2014 or 2015, so it's a little old, but it's still relevant. And the author, Derek Thompson, uses this illustration, and I want to explain it to you. He talks about how, like, if you're at least my age, I would be probably one of the last generations who this is true for, what I'm about to say. But if you're at least my age, I'm 33, you grew up going to high school. If you went to high school, like not if you weren't homeschooled, if you went to a public or a private high school where you walked the hallways from class to class and you went to lunch in the big lunch room, all of that, you would go to class, and of course you would socialize with your friends in class, your peers, but you're mostly listening to a teacher teach or whatever. The passing period in the hallway, at the lunchroom, those are like the social performance times, if you will. Most of us would never have said we're socially performing, but those passing periods, the lunchroom, they're like fashion runways. Like you're walking a certain way, talking a certain way, walking with certain people. You're socially performing. This is natural. It doesn't have to be as conceited as it sounds. But it's a natural experience. And sorry, I'm going to cough. And it can be really stressful. I mean, especially like I remember, like, I was not self-aware. I was not self-confident. I was a late bloomer. So like I was 5'7" until I was like a junior in high school. And now I'm 6, you can't tell. I'm 6'4". So like I was like, yeah, I was awkward. I was like gangly. Yeah. So I was not confident in myself, and I knew that, and it affected how I interacted with my peers. But everyone is kind of strutting their stuff, if you will, in these social. And then, if, you could, but when you went home, you could just like let your hair down, literally or metaphorically. You could be a slob, whatever. You could do what you wanted without worrying about if people were judging you. You could engage in that hobby that people would call you a nerd for, but if they didn't know you did it at home, who cared? Like, there is a safety at home. Another way this is often described is the home was like a backstage. At school, you felt like you were on stage. And when you went home, it was like you were going to the backstage. Until perhaps you would go to a basketball game, then you're performing again. You go to a school dance, you're socially performing again. I had this a bit, even though MySpace was a thing when I was in middle and high school, and Facebook became available for everyone when I was like 16. So I had social media a little bit, but the iPhone came out when I was a junior in high school. So nobody was really carrying social media around in their pockets like they are today. And so I had this experience that you could kind of go home and feel safe. Well, today, here's why social media, like the best anecdotal, circumstantial evidence that social media is harming teens' mental health. Teens today, like if you have a teenager, they're always, and if they're on social media, they're always in the hallway. That experience, that social stress of feeling like you're performing, feeling like you need to impress, feeling like you need to put on a show and show people why they should care about you or invite you to that party or ask you to the dance. You are constantly performing. The high schooler, the teenager today who's on social media has no backstage to which they can retreat. They feel like they're always in the hallway. And if you can at all remember what that feeling was like, if you ever felt any social anxiety, maybe you didn't, and you're like, this is great. No, but if you can imagine what that social anxiety feels like, there's no question why mental health issues are skyrocketing among young people. And to focus on that specifically, I want to highlight teen girls here. So I'm not going to go into all the data because we don't have time. But one of the things Jonathan Haidt has been very passionate about is demonstrating why teenage girls are being dramatically more negatively affected by this than teenage boys. I'm not going to recite the stats because I'd get them wrong and I don't want to do that. But basically, the reports of instances of suicide and self-harm among teenage girls and teenage boys since 2012, which is when Instagram became a thing, is skyrocketing. Now, it's not like in the 60% of teens are doing this, not like that, but like, in 2012, it was like 12% of girls, and now it's 24% or something like. And you don't want to see doubling of that in a decade or so. So, but girls are increasing at a far higher rate than boys are when it comes to mental health issues generally, but especially when it comes to like issues of self-harm and that sort of thing. And Jonathan Haidt is very, very passionate about the fact that there's a very clear reason for this. And if you think about it, and I wish if we were in a room together, I'd love to do a hand raise and see like who can guess the right answer. But if you just think about it logically, think about how teenage girls and teenage boys relate to one another. I don't know if you remember a teenage boy's locker room, or perhaps you've had a teenage boy. It's a scary place. You may not want to remember it. Or if you have a teenage boy, like a middle school boy, and you can get through the haze of Axe body spray and all of that. Boys resolve conflict physically, fighting each other. Like I can't tell you the number of fights I saw in middle school and high school locker rooms. So many of them. And that's how they resolve conflict. If you think about how teenage girls resolve conflict, I saw the occasional girl fight when I was in middle school and high school, and those were wild. But mostly, teen girls resolve or perpetuate conflict socially by backstabbing each other, by talking behind each other's backs, by passive aggressively like saying nice things that are actually cloaked mean things. That's how they resolve and perpetuate conflict, Which one of those two forms of conflict lends itself to social media more? Clearly, the girl version. Girls can backstab and betray each other at the literal speed of light through the internet in ways that they never could before. And so there's no, in my, like, I think Jonathan Haidt is 100% on the button. It's not like girls are weaker. It's not like they're just, more emotional. The way they conflict and engage with one another is supercharged negatively by social media. And I think it's just so clear. And I'm excited is maybe the wrong word to use. I'm very eager for more data over the next few years to continue to show that to be the case. And my hope for that is that we can get some serious regulatory action or something. Last one. Social media changes how your students believe. A young man coming of age in Rensselaer, Indiana in 1951 would have had the same general worldview as his neighbors, given that he wouldn't have interacted with many people outside of his hometown. He likely saw the world from the same ideological perch as his barber, his parents, and his priest. And any exposure to the outside world would have come through newspaper or radio reports, perhaps a passing war hero or businessman, until he went to college. If he went to college, this is, after all, 1950s or 60s, maybe he didn't go, but if he did go to college, until he did, the most formative force on the young man's worldview would have been his family, his friends, and his broader community. But a young man coming of age in Rensselaer, Indiana in 2021 or 2024 is more likely to have spent time talking to people across the globe on social media than he has spent talking to his barber, his priest, or even his parents. It's unlikely that teen's worldview has been shaped by his hometown in the same way that his grandfather's was shaped by his hometown 70 years earlier in the same context. Like I said earlier, part of my day job is running this website called BibleToLife.com, and we take bits and pieces of books that we publish and turn them into articles for people who are searching for theological or spiritual guidance on the internet, and they aren't sure of what websites to trust. More and more people, adults and teens alike, are going to social media and search engines to get answers to their spiritual and theological questions because they're often afraid or ashamed to be asking their parents or their spiritual leaders, is Jesus really real? How can I know he's the Son of God? Is the Bible okay with this kind of sexuality or that kind? They're kind of afraid to ask their loved ones or their spiritual leaders that, so they'll just Google it. I think your students, your teens, are likely looking for spiritual guidance on social media, and they're finding it. Whether or not it should be considered trustworthy, they're finding spiritual guidance on social media. And that's why we will talk through a few practical steps right now. So that's the very brief version of why social media changes how your students believe. I think it's pretty clear. I could tell you half a dozen stories of students I've discipled over the years who have come to me asking about a deep theological principle that I never would have thought they would think about, the deity of Jesus. And I'm like, man, I didn't even know you were paying attention on Wednesday. How are you asking me about the deity of Christ? And they'll come and ask me that because of some YouTube video they watched, which is like great. Like, I'm glad they're thinking about it, but it's like that. The spiritual journey for many young people is starting on the internet rather than starting at home. And we can either whine and complain about that, or we can adapt to it. And I think we can't really stop it, so we should probably just adapt to it. So what can you do? As a parent, we're going to blaze through this and then leave ourselves with time for questions, because I'm sure there's going to be some things that would be helpful. So what can you do? First, create a culture of grace. Create a culture of grace. This is super important. I think I could talk about this for a really long time, but I think what's important here that I'll mention is a lot of teenagers are afraid, I think, to talk to their parents about hard things. Like, I love my parents. My parents are amazing, but I had a hard time talking to them about hard stuff sometimes. I was a typical teenager who loved my parents, but I was like, I don't know if I could talk about this topic or that topic because they might, judge me, or, I think every teen has some measure of that in them, no matter how awesome their parents are. But I think by creating a culture of grace, that could look at a lot of different ways. But I think if you can create a culture in which you repeatedly, regularly communicate to your teen, nothing is off limits here. I'm going to love you no matter what. And maybe use specific, like teens are kind of maybe used to hearing that, but using specific examples of I'm going to love you even if you this, I'm going to love you even if that. I think it's a common refrain I've heard from teens and parents is basically teens hiding using social media, hiding what they're doing on social media because they're afraid of what their parents would say or do or think. And there's some element of that you'll never be able to get rid of, obviously, because teens want to hide their sin and not confront consequences. But I think you, as a parent, you can kind of mitigate that a little bit by preempting that conversation, by not just reacting, but like proactively setting the stage. What I've often told parents is like, when it comes to, like a student sinning on social media, like, engaging with content they shouldn't, being a bully on social media, whatever. I'm kind of like, well, they sin everywhere else, don't they? Like, are you really surprised that they're sinning on social media? We should be ready for our students to fail. If we're letting them on social media, like, understand they're gonna mess up. They're gonna seek out content they shouldn't. They're gonna be mean to people because they're mean in the hallway. Because like this, I'm not excusing it, but I'm just saying like we shouldn't expect our students to be any more righteous on the internet than they are off of it, And so I think if you can lay that culture of grace down, of like, this is a place where we can talk about our failure. And frankly, I think for parents, a lot of times that's talking about your own failure. And so if you can create that culture of grace, I think it can go a long way to making it not seem like you are against your kids or like you're going to punish your kids for engaging with content they shouldn't out of spite or because you're angry or ashamed. So anyway, I think that's a big first step. Second, welcome hard conversations. Welcome hard conversations. This one is you're not going to have to worry about welcoming hard conversations if you don't create a culture of grace, because you won't ever have anything to talk to your students about. So hard conversations are kind of natural fruit of a culture of grace. And so I think this is where, like, again, and I say this as someone who's worked in student ministry. I recognize I'm not a parent of a teenager. Okay. So if you want to discount me because of that, that's fine. But like, I think you broaching hard topics, social media use, what people are doing on social media, how social media can be misused, you starting that conversation rather than reacting when it happens to your kid or your kid does something they shouldn't. I think if you can engage in hard conversations yourself proactively, that can go a really long way as well. And so I think these are hand in glove. Like, having a culture of grace leads to hard conversations. If you want to have conversations with your kid about hard topics related to social media, you have to have a culture of grace, because otherwise they're not going to want to open up. And so I think those are two quick steps. Third one, final, always be partnering with other people. Always be partnering with other people. You cannot do this on your own, which might be scary, but should also feel freeing. It's becoming clearer and clearer. I'm not talking about this tonight because we don't have time, but like, it is becoming clearer and clearer that the social media platforms that we all use, but especially that teens use, are actively working to addict teenagers to their platforms. Like, I just wrote an article back in around Thanksgiving after some unredacted documents came out from Facebook lawsuits. 42 attorneys general, bipartisan, are suing Meta, Facebook, for putting profits ahead of teens' mental health. And the evidence is damning. The evidence is, I mean, you maybe saw this week that Zuckerberg went before a congressional committee and just got torched. I mean, and rightfully so. And because they, like, just as an example, Facebook, Instagram, Meta being the umbrella company, has hired biologists to study adolescent biology to best addict them to Instagram. Like, this is, I'm not like wearing a tinfoil hat. There are emails in court documents from Facebook employees about these topics. And so I think what parents need to realize, the number one thing I hear from parents when I talk about this is they feel helpless. And yeah, because no offense to you, my beloved Hoosier parent of a teenager, you're not going to be able to hold much of a candle to a very highly paid, very advanced adolescent psychologist, biologist who's working for Meta. Like, good luck. They're probably going to figure out ways to addict your teenager no matter how hard you try on your own. And this is why we need to partner with other people, parents banding together. One of the most creative, it's like kind of goofy to me, but it I've heard tremendous success with this, is like parents who are in a church small group together, or parents whose kids are on the same soccer team, kind of getting together when their kids are approaching teenage years and being like, hey, can we all make a pact to not let our teens on social media till they're 16, 17? And I've heard great, like, it kind of sounds weird or silly, but I've heard really great things about it, because that's one of the things that we may get into in Q&A time, is keeping kids off social media for their protection is admirable. I applaud you whenever and however you're doing that. But I think what parents often forget about or don't know about is there is often a tremendous offline negative social impact for a kid who doesn't have social media. Like, they can be kicked out of friend groups because they weren't a part of that inside joke on Snapchat. And so I think parents who band together, who like all their kids are friends and say, hey, we're not going to let our teens on until they're 16, that can really help teenagers, because then the cost of not having social media doesn't feel as great. And so, but whether it's partnering with places like GracePoint, partnering with your local church, your student minister. I'm sure plenty of student ministers aren't equipped to help with this, but I'm hoping through my work and others that plenty are. And so I think just for you parents, like, always be partnering with others. Know that you shouldn't try to do this alone, because you probably can't. And just kind of accepting that and owning that, and not trying to be the superhero, and reaching out to other parents, reaching out to people at the school if you trust them, reaching out to people in your church or your broader community. See what others are doing, see what's working, work together. Don't try to walk this road by yourself, because you're going to get weary and fall in the ditch probably. So I could keep going for a really long time, but it is 6:30 and I want to leave us 30 minutes for Q&A/discussion. So I will stop it there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'll leave this up for a second. We're going to do Q&A time. If your question is not answered, if you're concerned, if you don't want to put it in the chat or like put it in the Q&A, whatever, just email me. This is my email. This is my primary personal email. It's not some empty inbox I give to people to email and me never respond. Email me your question. I'll do my best to try to answer it. Email me your question. I'll do my best to try to answer it for you and try to help you as best I can with whatever it is you're wondering. I may not have a great answer, but I'll try. So if you don't get a question answered tonight, or you don't feel comfortable asking it or whatever, I will maintain complete confidentiality. Don't worry about emailing me. And I'm happy to address anything that maybe doesn't get addressed tonight. So that's what I have for you. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Very helpful. And I'm going to send everyone that attended a follow-up email in the next few days here. And if it's okay with you, Chris, I'll just include that. I'll include your email out. So just everybody that's attending tonight has your email address, and then they'll have access to it if they need to ask you a question. So I guess as we're continuing to chat here, and I've got some questions already, I'm going to ask Chris and kind of have some back and forth time with him. If there's any other questions that you guys want to ask, just keep sending them through the Q&A function like I mentioned, and I'd be happy to ask those on your behalf. So I guess I hadn't really thought about that last point as far as working together with, other parents or with your church leaders or whatever it is to kind of, I guess, circle the wagon, so to speak, and kind of have a collective approach to how we're going to handle this. So that's a great point, and I don't want this question to in any way discount that, because that's not my plan here. But if you could speak to parents as individuals and maybe give some general rules of thumb for individual parents who are caring for individual children. What would be some specific guidelines you can give them to best gauge or guide their child's relationship with social media? So, I guess I'm asking specifically any particular apps they should be using, any particular, limits they should be setting on screen time, usage time, things like that. Does that make sense? Just like some practical, if I wanted to do three things tomorrow to help my child have a better relationship with social media, what should those things be?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. So many things we could talk about here. First, I would say this as a sort of disclaimer. Um, no, do not rely on an app to protect your kids. In the same way that, not to convict you parents here, but I feel passionately about this. In the same way, you shouldn't rely on the church to disciple your kids. It's your job to disciple your kids, and the church is there to resource and equip and help you. You should not expect an app to protect your kid from any bad stuff online. It's there as a resource and a tool to help you as a parent, but the best protection for your kid using a phone or the internet is you and regular conversation, regular interaction about it, that sort of thing. Because I can tell you this, and this does not negate everything I'll say after it, but it's reality. Your kid, if they want to, will figure out a way to get around whatever app you use to try to monitor them. Trust me, I in the same way that like hackers are always ahead of cybersecurity people. My dad works in cybersecurity. He went to Purdue and got a computer science degree and now works in cybersecurity. And he's like, the hackers are always ahead of us. It's just a matter of us responding as best as we can. Kids are always ahead of their parents when it comes to apps monitoring their phone use. So just know that. That's why I say you can't rely on an app to do this for you by
Right.
itself. However, there's a number of apps. The Circle Parental Controls app I've heard is great. Some other ones, obviously, you have like Covenant Eyes for things more like pornography use or just even like monitoring surveillance in general. Um, there are other ones called like Custodio, Google Family Link, perhaps if you're more on Android devices. Bark is one I've heard of. Also, if you have like I have an iPhone, this is for both you and your kid, but definitely use the screen time functions. I think it's so great. Like there's a lot of negativity around big tech today, and I think much of it's fair, some of it's unfair. But I think Apple has done a tremendous job of trying to protect people from looking at their phones too much. Like they didn't have to add the screen time function, but they did. And I think it's really helpful
Mhm.
that they added the ability to limit and encourage the ability to use this function. And so for me, I'll just tell you what I've done, and I think you could at least do this for your teens, if not for yourself, is I have made it so I can't use any social media before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m. I've done this. I'm not doing this right now. I've done this in times where I've like been using social media a lot, and then it's like, okay, if I've kind of trained and disciplined myself, then I can take the shackles off, if you will. But what I have done very often in the past, and I always have it available at a moment's note, I can just switch this on, is no social media apps are able to be used before 7 a.m. or after 9 p.m. so that it's not interrupting reading and Bible time in the morning or like time with my wife in the evening. And I have limited how much time, so you can limit it by like time of day, and you can limit it by how much time you spend in a certain category of apps. You can go down to the specific app, like if your kid only uses Instagram, like you could just do that. But if your kid uses 3 different social media platforms, you could just say all apps that are social media. Like you can just have it kind of collectively. You could say they can't use social media apps for more than an hour a day. And so when they spend an hour throughout those 3 favorite social media apps, Apple, or I'm sure Androids do this as well, will shut down those apps. And they can't get back in them unless they know the screen time code, which, again, they will probably figure out. So be having don't use your anniversary or one of your birthdays, use something totally random. And then when they figure that out, figure out a new one. That frankly, I think more than like even a content monitoring app like a Covenant Eyes or whatever, which again, like kids know how to get around a lot of that stuff. I think
Right.
limiting screen time is one of the best ways to go. Also, one more thing, turn off, and this is for parents and teens, turn off all notifications for social media, period. That's one of the things from these unredacted documents from that came out in the fall. Internal Facebook employees said to leaders at Facebook, hey, we're abusing notifications on Facebook and Instagram to try to keep people hooked on our apps. And the leaders were like, yeah, but it's working, so we need to keep doing it. And so these, like, it's really as simple as like a psychological experiment where it's like the mouse presses the button and gets a treat. It's like we get a little red bubble on our Facebook app and we feel like we need to press it. Like, so
Hmm.
I think one of the best ways we can kind of un untrain ourselves, unshackle ourselves from social media's influence is by using social media on our terms rather than on the app's terms. And that means choosing to engage that app when we want to, not when it beckons us with a vibration or a ding or a little red number 1 or 5 or whatever. That's
Hmm.
true for us and for our teens. So I've never had in the last 5 or 6 years, I turned off all notifications for social media so that I'm not beckoned to use them, but I choose to use them enough on my own already.
Right.
So I don't need them saying, hey, 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 come check this out. That goes for both the parent and the child, I think.
Okay. So that's really helpful. And yeah, obviously any of these suggestions are not going to be silver bullet that all of a sudden solves all the issues and the potential problems, but
Sure.
it's still good to have, resources like that that can be used in a to supplement your role as a parent. And I appreciate you saying that. So I guess another question is, I'm sure there's some social media apps that you would say our kids just should not use, period. And are there specific apps that you would warn parents that if their child has this app on their phone, it needs to be removed and not allowed? And you might say all social media, I don't know. But the reality is that that's probably not realistic, but are there a handful of apps that parents should be very concerned about?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question before, which is rare that I come across one of those. And it's a good question and an understandable question. I think, there there's one that comes to mind, but I think it's a little unfair, but I'll say it with a qualification. I think um one of the most potentially insidious ones is Snapchat. But I don't, because of just that such an it's just so easy to get caught up in sexting and things like that where you're sending images or just text and things disappear but not really, they have the
Mhm.
illusion of disappearing. I've heard of plenty of students, but here's the thing, like here's why I qualify that. For a lot of students, like they're not doing anything nefarious on there. It's just like it's the primary app they use for texting. Like
Mhm.
it's their texting app. So
Right.
I think early on, understandably so, Snapchat got this reputation of being inherently dirty. And I think maybe early on that was a little justified. But in my interactions with teens that I trust, now they could be lying to me, but I've over time, kind of gathered some teens that I've worked with that I think are mostly above board on a lot of this stuff and aren't doing things they shouldn't.
Mhm.
A lot of them they're using Snapchat as their texting app. They're not just like, oh, let me go to Snapchat to send inappropriate things. Doesn't mean they aren't, but it's not like
Right.
that's what they go there for. So that's why I say that one with a bit of qualification. I think it's the one that lends itself to some of the most nefarious, like the potential for nefarious activity is clearly there, but I don't think it's like, oh, it's just never let them. I don't think it's like that. I don't think there's any really like that. I
Okay.
think because Instagram has the ability to have disappearing messages now too, so it's not like
Right.
you hit one mole and it just pops up somewhere else. So like that's there, and so much more bullying and stuff goes on Instagram. So it's not like, yeah, there's some stuff on Snapchat that could be really awful, but frankly, a lot of the social stuff that happens on Instagram could be worse in some
Yeah.
respect. A lot of people like to bring up TikTok. I think this might people might just dismiss me at this point, but TikTok's my favorite social media platform right now. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'm not anti social media. Like I limit my time. I'm very restrictive with myself on what I use and how much I use it. But I don't think it's like 100% bad. Like I think it's fun to find funny cat videos and watch interesting YouTube videos and learn how to fix my refrigerator through a YouTube video like that. I think there are plenty of redeemable, great uses of social media. I'm not 100% anti social media.
Right.
I just think we have to be intentional about our use of it. And I love TikTok because it's like the second version of Vine, which is my favorite social media app ever. The old 6-second video app that was very much like TikTok. But the thing that does concern me about TikTok is it has the best algorithm out of any social media app, which means it's as good at sucking our teens' time as any other social media app. So I have concern, and a lot of people are concerned about TikTok in China or whatever, which I'm just like, if you're concerned about what China's doing with your kids' data on TikTok, let me introduce you to Facebook or Instagram, because what they're doing is not a whole lot better. Trust me.
Mhm.
I'm not as concerned about the China TikTok thing. I am more concerned about just how addictive TikTok is. Like they're so good at keeping eyeballs. They're better, frankly, than any other app we've seen. And
Mm.
so that's where I get concerned with TikTok is like, if I had a teen, I would be more concerned with them staying up until 2 in the morning watching TikToks than I would be about them like sending a explicit photo of themselves through Snapchat. When I'm like triaging risks
Right.
of like most likely like being up super late watching TikTok in bed, I feel like is just super common right now
Mm.
based on what I'm hearing. So that's but that's where screen time things, that's where having your kid's phone sleep in another room from where they're at, in your room, not theirs, like I think there are plenty of ways to guard against that kind of stuff. But if I were a parent, I would hesitate banning certain apps and be more, if my daughter was 13 right now and not 3, I I wouldn't have her on social media at 13, so that's beside the point. But if she was 16 right now and not 3, and I'm like, okay, maybe we're getting close to social media time, I would be more interested in teaching her healthy use than banning use of certain things. So
Right. Yeah, that's great. And the last thing you were saying there kind of goes back to the benefit of the screen time limits that, like you said, not, nothing after 9 o'clock or
yeah,
whatever the time is, that would really limit some of the danger and some of the misuse. And the last statement you made actually leads right into what the next question I was going to ask is, which you probably get a lot. And I know there's not an age. Um, like people want to know, well, when is my kid ready for social media? But that's not the question I want to ask. It's more, I think the biggest mistake that probably a lot of parents make is they just give their kids a smartphone and they just say, here you go. And so there's nothing on the front end of really what you just mentioned about, smart usage or healthy usage principles. How, when we're giving our kids something that could potentially expose them to so much danger on the front end, what is kind of a way to introduce a child to social media, whether that's a 13-year-old or 15-year-old or whatever? What are some specific principles, even scripture verses, or,
yeah,
um, does that question make sense that you would want to
yeah,
introduce them to on the front end?
yeah. I'm looking up a resource real quick. Because I want to recommend a resource.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So first, I want to briefly answer the what's the right age for social media, because I don't think anyone asked it, but it is the most common question I get, and I can
Right.
give a brief answer. There is no right age for social media. Now there are wrong ages, the platforms themselves say you have to be 13. So
Okay.
if Instagram's saying your kid needs to be 13, they shouldn't be on when they're 12 because Instagram does not really care about your kid. So if they're saying 13, then you better believe you better not do it before 13.
Right.
And so I know plenty of kids who've gotten on before 13 because they lie about their age, which, yeah, I mean, like, that's like understandable. Like, that's common. I'm not saying it's okay, but it's a common thing.
Right.
Uh, but I would definitely say no kid on social media before 13. And I don't know what the right age is. Like I said, I don't really think there is one. I think every kid is different, and parents need
Right.
to evaluate their kid in their context. Because there's this, there are going to be 15-year-olds who are more mature than 17-year-olds and whatever. So, but I think that the what's most important is figuring out what you said. Like, what do you do as you get to that point? There's a great
Hmm.
resource. I read it in its pre-publication state, so I haven't read the final one, called social media pressure: finding peace alongside Jesus, by John Parrott. And I believe this is the one. Yeah, it's devotionals for teens, about interacting online, that sort of thing. It's not sort of something you would give to someone before they start using social media, because this is a little bit about like once they're already on. But I think it's a great resource for teens on social media.
Okay.
Also, I think because I've thought about this myself. I have a daughter who's almost 4, and it might not be hard to believe, but I'm already thinking about this for myself, because the social media conversation is probably closer than I want it to be. And what we're trying to do, even at this young of an age, is start to set the stage of technology discipline through screen time with the television. Our daughter doesn't really, we don't use the iPad with her, or even really our phones, unless we're like in a really desperate state at the doctor's office or something like that.
Hmm.
But she does love to watch her favorite shows on TV, on Disney Plus, on PBS Kids app. She loves some Daniel Tiger, some Bluey, very, typical stuff, Paw Patrol, all that. Um, and so we just tried to be we figure not only is it good to discipline a kid with TV screen time for all of the reasons you could imagine, but if we can start doing some discipline around technology in this way, then it will start to translate to discipline around technology in other ways. If
Right.
we just were unfettered TV access right now, it's going to be hard to put any restrictions on a phone or social media a decade from now. Like, it's it's going to be hard to start to do that too late. And so I think what we're trying to do, even at this young of an age, is start to teach discipline around technology and screens, no matter what form it takes. So if you
Right.
have like a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old and you're here, or a 13-year-old who's not on social or whatever, I think if you can start to um, work on some discipline around technology that isn't a phone or isn't social media, computer time, video game time. This is where, again, my parents were amazing, but all this stuff was so new when I was a teenager that there wasn't. They were having to learn this among the first generation of parents who had teenagers who had access to the internet at all times.
Right.
Not to mention, my dad worked for IBM, so we always had good internet, good computers from the time I was in first grade. And so I was always tinkering with this stuff. But, I think had my parents put more strict requirements on my video game time, that could have helped me with social media or the internet down the road. And I think that applies to parents today. Like, if your 13-year-old boy eventually, wants a phone soon or wants social media soon, start limiting his Minecraft time some. Start teaching him discipline around Fortnite. Like, use those things as tools, as sort of stepping stones to discipline around phones and social media. I don't have other than the social media pressure resource, which is more for teens who are getting on social media than before. I can't think of a resource off the top of my head that's kind of a guide to starting. Maybe I need to write that one. I don't
There we
know.
go.
But they may exist. I'm just not aware. But if you can find resources like that, or figure out I think, reading through the Proverbs with your kids, and working through any wisdom resources. There's
Right.
no Bible verses that talk about social media, obviously, but there's plenty of scripture that talks about wisdom, controlling your tongue, spending your time wisely. I think if you can find resources to disciple your preteens and teens toward wisdom in life, that will go a long way to applying, have some specific application to social media use.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, So let's switch gears to a parent who maybe they have kind of given their kid absolute freedom with social media, and now it's to the point where um, things have kind of gotten out of control, let's say. Um, and they, a parent that knows, okay, my child is addicted to social media, to TikTok, whatever it is. Um, any pointers on how to intervene in that situation when it's kind of past the point of kind of giving, protective principles on the front end? Now you're kind of trying to reverse course in a extreme situation. Obviously, the things you already mentioned are helpful, like creating a culture of grace and welcoming hard conversations and doing those sorts of things. But do you have any specific pointers in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think getting this is where partnering with other people is going to be huge. So I think getting help from other parents, from church leaders, from local counselors and therapists who you trust. I think like I if I were a parent in that situation, that is not something I would want to try to resolve on my own.
Right,
Um, for the same reason that I mean, less common, but if your kid had a drug problem, you probably wouldn't try to just resolve that on your own.
right,
You'd probably get them in a rehab facility, get professionals to help them.
right,
I mean, a social media or even broader phone addiction is also a drug problem. It's just a dopamine problem, probably. Uh,
right,
so, like, uh, I, I would encourage a parent in that situation to, I think there are probably some things you can do in terms of just like if you have such a relationship with your kid where you can talk about how it's affecting them and you can try to if they see it's negatively affecting if they don't see it's negatively affecting them. I mean that's really where I think you need some kind of professional help.
right,
If they and I've talked with a lot of teens who have seen how social media negatively affects them, like they have the self-awareness to see it. Then as a parent, I think you have a little bit of a foot in to start. Maybe you can kind of handle that on your own and walk through. Okay, you feel you tell me you feel bad after you use Instagram. Can we talk about like
hmm,
why that is? What is it that makes you feel bad? Why do you still use it? If your kid has the humility and the self-awareness to recognize that it's negatively impacting them, I think maybe you're empowered a bit as a parent to walk down that road. If they're just like on it all the time, cussing you out whenever you try to take it away, um, I if that were happening with me, I would drag my kid to a counselor. Like
right,
I don't know, like because I as a parent, I even knowing what I know about social media, I don't know how I would expect myself to resolve that on my own.
right. Okay. So I guess at least part of your suggestion in that case is to be willing to ask for help
Definitely.
when it's an extreme situation that maybe you can't resolve yourself, and that's okay to admit that
Yeah.
and to reach out to someone who can intervene and can help.
Right. And that could be like if there's a teacher that your kid really loves, like, they may
Hmm.
not respond well to being drugged to a counselor, but if there's like, that your kid loves their math teacher and you can just like send them an email, be like, look, John's really addicted to YouTube. He never stops watching it. I can't really get through to him, like, but I know he loves you. Can you help me work through this with him? Like, if you can find other people in the teens' lives that they respect and look up to, if they're
Right.
not listening to you as a parent, which I understand because there are a lot of times where I trusted other people in my life a lot more than my parents. And that's no knock on my parents. They were amazing. It's just I was a hard-headed teenager. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a common thing. And so I think if you don't want to go like the, formal kind of counselor or therapist route, if you can find adults in your kid's life who could speak into them, that's where partnering with others I think is huge.
Yeah. Which is a great encouragement or reminder of the importance of being, connected to a local church body, have your kids connected to local church bodies, youth ministry, and where there will be other leaders beside you that are there, that are available, that can have a relationship with them, that they might be willing to have a conversation with about social media when maybe they wouldn't necessarily talk to their parents. Um, so we've got about 4 minutes left. I guess I have one more question I was going to ask, and then we can kind of wrap up from there, unless you had any last minute thoughts you wanted to share. But let's say, what would be some, I guess, warning signs a parent would look for to know that maybe their kid has a social media problem, other than just, well, his face is glued to the screen 12 hours a day, and other than the obvious fact that he's on it too much, is there any other kind of things that you would encourage parents to be looking for that would indicate maybe there's a problem that they have there?
Yeah, I think it's what's nice about this situation is it's going to be hard for a teenager to hide that they're addicted to social media.
Right,
It'd be easier for them to hide they're addicted to cocaine because they can just do it once a day in the
right,
parking lot after school and you not know, whatever.
yeah,
This is going to be a little harder to hide because they're going to be faces glued to their screen. So that's going to be, like you said, your first sign.
right,
Uh, but I think uh, if this one is like kind of a take it with a grain of salt, but I think if you see their mood being dramatically affected when they're engaging with their phones slash after. Now, teens are moody. I was, all teens are at some point. That's just called development. Uh,
right,
so don't assume that, oh, my teen is moody today, they must be addicted to Instagram. No, no, no.
right,
Pump the brakes.
yeah,
Like, if you're a parent of a teenager, that's not the case probably. But I think, like, if it follows, as soon as they hop off TikTok, they're just like irritable all the time, or they, like that kind of thing. Like, if you start to notice some patterns like that,
hmm,
that would be a sign. If they just, like, if they get violent physically, verbally, when you administer restrictions that you haven't before,
right,
that would be a problem. Like, that would be a sign that, okay, maybe we have something going on here.
right,
Um, I think, yeah, those are the first. So I guess, like, those are the first signs. I think, like, if they're losing sleep naturally, but that's kind of the glued to the screen situation. So I think if you're seeing it impact their emotions, impact their behavior,
mhm,
impact their grades, obviously, but a lot of these things are going to kind of flow out of you seeing them looking at their screen all the time.
yeah,
So, but I think those are all warning signs that something bad is going on here, and it's not just my kid watches too much YouTube. It's like my kid is being turned into a, a less mature, more irritable person because he watches YouTube. Like, those are different
right,
things, and I think they can manifest in different ways.
yeah. Okay, good. That's helpful. Well, we are out of time, 7 o'clock now. So I did want to briefly mention our next webinar, which will be 2 weeks from tonight at the same time. Could you give a 30-second introduction snippet of that particular webinar and kind of how it will be different than this one?
Yeah, let me pull up what I plan to talk about. This one will be called How to Use Social Media Without Losing Yourself. So this one was more about kind of looking out. Hey,
Hmm.
social media is affecting my young people in my life. How can I recognize that and help them? The second one is, so that's more in line with, like, the Wolf book, Wolf in Their Pockets. The second one is more in line with terms of service, which is maybe a little bit more uncomfortable with folks in the room, but it's more of a mirror. It's more like, how can I use social media without losing myself, without losing my mind, without becoming a jerk? Like, how can I use social media without becoming addicted? And I
Right,
think I think many of us use social media without thinking about the hidden costs of it. And so this one will be, it could certainly apply to teenagers, but it's more about, like, how can I rightly evaluate my relationship with social media? What can I do about that? What does an intentional relationship with social media look like versus a sort of unintentional or reactive relationship? And so this one, yeah, will be a little bit more introspective and more about our relationship than young people's and who we love. And so that's a little bit of a preview on that one.
Yeah, great. And that is for parents who are looking to lead and guide their children. Um, we first and foremost need to lead by example. So we
But that's
can't.
yeah, and I didn't talk much about that tonight. But that's huge. Like you're gonna have a hard time telling your 15-year-old to get off his phone at the table if you're on your phone at the table. And so I think zing might have hurt some parents' feelings on that one, but like it's true. And so I think
Yeah,
we really do have to lead by example, and that's something that where maybe our time in 2 weeks can help parents with that a little bit.
maybe we should have that one first.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's good. And yeah, if we're gonna guide our children in this area of their life, then we need to be responsible ourselves first. Otherwise, we're asking them to do something we're not willing to do ourselves, and that really takes the influence away as a parent and makes your parenting much less effective. So, well, thank you again, Chris, for sharing your wisdom with us. I would encourage everyone to pick up the book, and it's 13 chapters of very thorough and a very detailed breakdown of many of the things that he shared tonight. And so I would encourage you guys to pick that up and go ahead and register for our webinar 2 weeks from tonight. And it'll be much the same as far as the overall schedule and things. It'll just be slightly different material in terms of what he'll be sharing. So without further ado, I'd like to close us in prayer, and then we'll be done for tonight. So let's pray. Lord, we do thank you for Chris. We thank you for the things that he shared with us tonight. I pray, Lord, that the parents who are online attending tonight were encouraged and helped, and that the various situations that they're each dealing with right now and the challenges that they're facing with their children and their social media usage, that they would find things that were discussed tonight that they can begin to apply right away, and that they would know that they're not alone in the challenges that they're facing. And most of all, Lord, that they would lean on you and rely on you for the grace and strength and understanding that they need to guide their children in this area of their lives. So I pray that you would help them and strengthen them and encourage them in the days ahead, and that you would help us, Lord, to serve you and to glorify you in our personal usage of the internet and social media as well. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone else. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. So have a good evening. We'll see you.
Thanks, everyone.